talking about like therapy especially, it's just like tensions that may come up with family because of, culture or family expectations. What are some messages that you received about mental health and therapy from your families growing up?
So I think for me, like back home, the way mental health was treated is like it was one of two ways. So either a lot of people looked at it in a very religious sense, and that like somebody was struggling with their mental health, or was like, it was something that was not right in your spiritual life. Maybe it was like demons, or it was something that was not right in your spiritual life. And the other way was mainly kind of like how my family personally dealt with it, is that people doesn't have like a lot of experience with like looking at mental health as, your health, like
Right.
things like therapy. Like my mom is always, usually pushing me. She's like, you need to talk to someone even if you are feeling good right now, preventative measures are better than, going when you're at a low point.
Definitely. I think prevention is key, and I think that's for a lot of folks, a cultural shift, because I think, like you said, like people oftentimes don't consider mental health as a part of like your total wellness. And like being in different wellness spaces, it's really interesting to hear people sort of chop it up. It's like mental health, that's over there. Physical health is over there. Spiritual health is over there. But they're all very much so interconnected. I remember hearing from my extended family, right, this idea, like a lot of folks, like they didn't believe depression was a thing, right? You're not praying hard enough, right? So pray. You don't go to church anymore. Make sure you're going to church, right? And it's like, depression is real. People experience it to, various degrees, but it's not only about praying, and it's not to discount people's religious beliefs, but it's like you can't use religion to minimize or erase the need for mental health support, especially as folks of color, navigating white supremacy, sexism, and all the other intersections. Like all of that stuff matters.
I was on Facebook, and I'm in a Black-owned New Jersey group chat. And someone had asked for recommendations for a therapist. They were around in their 20s, maybe 30s. And it was interesting to see the responses from older people as they said, you need to go to church, or you have God, talk to God. I remember reading someone's post where they said, I hope you all are aware that the person is looking for other resources than God, and God is not limited to just the church setting.
Right.
So I think the struggle with just older parents and our generations is that they're teaching just on the reliability on church and just God in your relationship has kind of given them the fact that depression isn't real and that anxiety isn't real. So it's like, how do we kind of break that generational myth that we solely should rely on one resource or one means of resources to get help?
My parents are both pastors, so I totally understood what both of you were saying about how if someone is struggling through something, it's always like, oh, your relationship with God isn't right. And I think that it's because there's this stigma with religion that if you're going through something hard, it's kind of like it's a punishment for something that you have done in the past. So there's like that belief that if you don't want to go through anything bad, like you need to have a good relationship with God. And that's not true. I've seen my parents, who I would consider have great relationship with God, go through some of the toughest times that I've ever seen anyone else go through. And so, like you said, God, yes, helps. Having faith helps, yes. But you do need other resources. Sometimes you need medication, sometimes you need to see a therapist.
Sometimes I'm curious about folks who have that experience with religion where they're being pushed further and further into religion as a way of like avoiding like mental health support. Like what does that do in terms of like their relationship with their spirituality? And like what are the potential impacts of like that narrative, and people, like how do they perceive religion after seeing it's like, well, I'm not getting any answers from God, so what does that mean about me, right? And what does that do around like feelings of worthiness? So I'm very open about talking about my experience with therapy, and even with my mom. And I remember like when I first told her I was in therapy, she's like, oh, okay, cool. And then one day she asked me, she was like, did I mess you up? Like, was this us? Are you in therapy because of us? I'm like, oh, not because of you. I mean, I'm sure there are things in my childhood that I need to unpack and use that to give me greater context as to why I have some of the patterns that I have. but like, I don't think you messed me up. So I realized part of like the fear that came up for her with me in therapy is like, what did she do wrong? But it's like, we're complex people. Like, we carry our traumas and they manifest itself in like a variety of ways that we can't necessarily predict. But it's been interesting talking to her about it over the last 3 years and how it's shifted, because now like she's telling all my aunts, like she's like, you all need therapy. Sade's been in therapy. If she can be in therapy, y'all need it. And they are really resistant against that. They're like, well, I go to church, you know? So it's really interesting to see how some of them are willing to like sort of bend and like explore something different, and how others are very much so tied to this idea that God got me, which, word, good for you, and we have resources for a reason.